Welcome to ILTV's Insider. I'm Aaron Porras, and today we're here to ask some yet-to-be-answered questions ahead of President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration into the White House. And joining me to discuss is Chair of Democrats Abroad Israel, Heather Stone, and Ambassador Dani Ayalon, former Israeli ambassador to the United States and former Israeli deputy foreign minister. Thank you both so much for being with us. Now, to begin, Heather, I'm actually going to turn to you. I think that we should start with Iran and Israeli strikes in Syria against Iranian holdings. Netanyahu clearly showing his red line after having consistently railed against the JCPOA nuclear deal from 2015. How do you think the Biden administration will handle Iran going forwards?
Well, I think that the Biden administration will look at the facts on the ground and begin to look for ways in which to approach a new international arrangement for an agreement with Iran.
Do you see any sort of details forming with respect to his, top picks in his cabinet, with respect to things that he's said recently, or even going back to the killing of Soleimani last year, where he condemned the killing of Soleimani and several other military movements as unnecessary provocations?
Well, he's said what he has said, and I think that it's clear that he does not want to see Iran get nuclear capabilities. But he's also aware of the things that have changed in the intervening 4 years. And we can thank Donald Trump for many of the things that have changed in the interim. We will have to see what will be possible to achieve in terms of a new arrangement. But he certainly has excellent picks in terms of foreign relations. And we'll see where that will lead. I'm sure that they will be working quite hard on trying to achieve new international alliances.
Ambassador Ayalon, same question.
Yes, well, I think what remains to be seen is pretty much the attitude or the approach. I have no doubt that the Biden administration, and first and foremost the president himself, president-elect until tomorrow, they all have the same strategic vision as Israel and the rest of the region. Absolutely. Iran is a threat to the United States just as it is to the region itself and much beyond the region, to Europe and other places. But given the experience we have with Iran, both in 2003 and 2015, we know that they move only when they feel the pressure. 2003 was the time when they voluntarily suspended their illegal nuclear activities when they were flanked by U.S. forces from the Iraqi side and also on the Turkey side, and they thought that they would be next. In 2015, unfortunately, the P5+6 were showing a very amenable approach to the Iranian demands, and that did not really make sense, because there is a balance of power. The old balance of power is still very valid when it comes to international agreements and to international negotiations. And when you judge the total capabilities and strength of Iran, of course, it is no match to any of the P5+1, certainly not to the United States. So one would think that the outcome of the negotiations, and Israel, I'm very much for negotiations. The question is not negotiations as an end, but also as a means to get a much better region, which is more peaceful and more stable.
Well, so speaking of negotiations, often it comes down to a question of leverage and arguing from a position of strength. Do you think that that's the case with the Biden administration coming after 4 years of Trump?
Well, I would expect and think so. I have a few good friends in the administration. I appreciate very much Tony Blinken, the new Secretary of State. Bill Burns is also a very good personal friend. So I know them, I know how they think, and I know what is the end goal. The question is also to get the other powers to agree. And first and foremost is Russia and China. In the P5+6, we have, some of the European countries and Germany, and also China and Russia, which not always play a very constructive role. But again, logic and reason would dictate that when you have Iran on the one hand, on the one side of the table, and you have the most powerful countries in the world on the other side, and they represent not just themselves, but so many other powers in the region and beyond, then that the result of the negotiation should be a total acquiescence by Iran to do away with its illegal nuclear program and to abide to much stricter conditions than the JCPOA of 2015 prescribed.
All right, now Heather, back to you. Do you agree maybe with the way that Netanyahu has maybe presented Israel's position on Iran, especially in the last couple of months, and how might that affect the ties with the Biden administration going forward?
I think that really what's important here is that the Biden administration is going to be working with an international coalition. And the Netanyahu government, we'll see if it continues after the March elections, will have to get in line with working with a democratic government and bipartisanship in the United States, and understanding that we are going back to the old order of international coalitions and international power, and that is the strength of the United States, of being able to bring together large coalitions, large international coalitions, to bring power to bear on outlier countries like Iran. And I think that will be more effective than going it alone, which is what Trump tried to do for the last 4 years.
Well, so I know that going forward, obviously we won't know until something happens. But given the history, and given that Biden originally coming as vice president under the Obama administration, had a very different opinion with respect to dealing with Iran and the nuclear issue than Israel did. Netanyahu famously coming to speak in front of Congress, despite not being invited, et cetera. Do you think that any of those sorts of disagreements might continue in so far that Israel is going to have all this advice and all this, say that will largely go ignored? Or do you think that this international coalition, as you call it, will include the Israelis to a larger degree?
I am hopeful that Netanyahu and others in the Israeli government and whoever will be forming the Israeli government after the March elections will be smart politicians and will look to the fact that the American government is now fully Democratic controlled, and will want to work with the Democratic government, and will want to seek bipartisanship, as had been the ways of the past. And Israel had never wanted to be a political football, and it should never be a political football. It should always be a consensus issue, and should strive for that going forward.
All right, now back to you, Ambassador. Do you think that Prime Minister Netanyahu did right by Israel in presenting that red line or that line in the sand, so to speak, and setting a tone, you could say, with the coming Biden administration?
Well, I think it's very important for Israel to be, and as we have been with all the administrations until now, to be transparent, to work together with them and not against them. There was a little aberration, unfortunately, with the Obama administration, which was to the detriment of everyone, both the US and Israel and the region itself. But I think it would be very important to engage in a very, very thorough, honest dialogue. We know how to do it. We have done it before. We have to remember that we are allies. We are friends, not only on the basis of strategic interests, but also on values and vision, and how we see the future on all its aspects, the economy and climate and anything else. So certainly a strategic outlook. So we should speak. I think it's important that the U.S. will know ahead of time, so there are no surprises where Israel stands. We have to remember, for us, it is existential. And once one understands that, then I think it's easier for anyone to prepare strategically and tactically for the future negotiations with Iran.
All right, now, speaking of Middle Eastern negotiations and Israel's friends and allies and how those relationships may be tested in the coming future, of course, we have the Abraham Accords and the multiple Arab countries who have now signed normalization and peace agreements with Israel under the Trump administration. Do you see, any changes in what those nations are going to be doing or how they're going to be reacting with the Middle East with the coming Biden administration? Or are they maybe just going to wait and see? Ambassador.
Well, Aaron, I think that the achievement with the Abraham Accord works well for the region and also for the position to not just contain Iran, but to put it back at bay and make sure that it will never be able to achieve nuclear weapons, as they are trying to do still.
Is that possible? We have to ask, is it possible not only to contain Iran, but to dial back their aspirations in that way?
I think so. Again, if I will invoke back the very palpable example of 2003, when Iran voluntarily stopped altogether all their nuclear activities. So it is very, I would say, it could be very imaginable that they would do this the same. What we have today is that I believe it's a critical mass of not just Israel, but all the other allies, traditional historical allies of the United States in the region, the moderate Sunni countries, together with Israel. I'm sure that would be a very formidable lobby in Washington, D.C., both in Congress and with the administration.
All right. Now, Heather, I'm ping-ponging back between the two of you, I feel, but I want to move on now, I think, to another issue that maybe might draw some sort of line between Israel and the United States, and that is, of course, on the settlement issue, where Biden has consistently said that he's for the two-state solution and that he wants negotiated solutions with respect to the settlements. But then you have Prime Minister Netanyahu, who just ahead of the inauguration has approved upwards of 800 settlement housing units. How do you think that, that move, which is clearly ahead of Biden's inauguration and influence, how do you think that influences the discourse that's going on and the norms, et cetera?
Well, I'm sure that the foreign policy team is looking at it carefully, and it's not something that is going to win over friends and make people happy. But on the other hand, we are allies, and that's not going to break the relationship.
Well, not so much that it would break the relationship, but in what way do you? Because I think that might set a tone for it's almost like testing boundaries, really, right? So what? How do you expect the Biden administration to really deal with those tests?
Well, I'm hopeful that those kinds of tests will not come up once Biden has already been inaugurated, and I'm hopeful that the action was taken before the inauguration in order to not do those kinds of things once Biden has been inaugurated, and in order to put those actions squarely inside of the Trump administration and not afterwards.
Ambassador?
Well, short of the Trump administration, we, with all the American administrations, successive ones, all of them since 1967 until now, we had different views on settlement, and we never hid it under the carpets. On the contrary, and this is an issue where friends agree to disagree. And here again, I think if we will see, I don't know if the Biden administration will have the attentions that could be dedicated to the Middle East at large, and after Iran, also the Palestinian issue. But if they do, certainly we should talk together and plan a workable program. And unfortunately, I do not see that that there are the conditions for a final status agreement. But we can certainly reach a win-win with all parties for some kind of a long-term, intermediate agreement, and this is something that can be achieved. One thing that I would love to point out, Aaron, and this is something that I've always told the Europeans, when they ask us like a precondition, stop the settlements, or, we already a priori decide that this is a Palestinian territory. By the way, in really stark contradiction to how they relate to other areas, whether they're occupied or disputed. But if they do take a position against Israel, then we would expect them also, to take a position about what the Palestinians euphemistically call the right of return. If the Americans or the Europeans really want to be taken seriously, and let's say without any chip on their shoulders, asking Israelis to curb settlements, they should ask at the same time the Palestinians to give up this right of return, which calls basically for the destruction of the state of Israel.
Well, given what you know about Biden's, administration and his foreign policy team, especially Anthony Blinken, do you think that he would take a harsher stance, you could say, with the Palestinian Authority to get them back to the negotiation table by saying, hey, yeah, you're going to have to give up on X, Y, and Z for us to take you seriously? Or do you think that it might actually be the opposite way around, that now that the Palestinian Authority is not at the table because of the Trump administration, for better or for worse, they're saying, no, you as the United States actually have to concede to us, maybe roll back some of Trump's changes in the status quo, change the recognition of Jerusalem, remove your embassy in order for us to come back to the table? What do you think is more likely?
Well, Aaron, in my mind, there's no question that the Biden administration would continue or would have the same outlook towards the solution here in the Middle East with the Palestinians as Obama. The two-state solution, and of course we respect that. By the way, it has to be emphasized, it's not just a two-state solution, 2 states for 2 peoples. We have not heard the Palestinians talk about the 2 peoples. But my question is, and I'm not sure that the Biden administration, again, given the history of intense negotiations to no avail by 5 different administrations, and the other issues which are on their plate, I'm not sure that they would really be ready, certainly not in the beginning, to really spend a political capital in trying to bring the Palestinians and the Israelis together when there's no end game, because things can explode mighty fast. So I believe that in the beginning, it will be I would say, a policy or strategy of controlled environment, conflict management, and not necessarily conflict resolution.
All right. Now, Heather, I want to ask you, you mentioned earlier how you don't believe that Israel should ever be a partisan issue, and I agree. It should be a bipartisan support network where we work together with all the parties in the United States here in Israel. But that being said, of course, we know that within the Democratic Party, there is division. So what are the divisions really between Biden, with respect to views on Israel, between Biden and his team and other Democrats, and Biden, other Democrats, and maybe Democratic voters? Is there a disconnect there?
Well, I think that Biden and his team are fully supportive of Israel, and Biden is the quintessential centrist within the Democratic Party, and he has been a longtime supporter of Israel. And I'm sure that Ambassador Ayalon knows this from his long experience with Biden in his many roles. And many of the people that he has named to be in his team, including Anthony Blinken, are strong supporters of Israel and know Israel well, and know the issues here and in the region. So I don't think that you have to be concerned at all about depth of knowledge and understanding and support for Israel as an ally. In terms of when people start to
you have the nomination for the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, who called recently on the Democratic National Committee to adopt harsher language against Israel and Israeli policies in the Middle East. So, I mean, that's within his team. So the question is how much influence, her views really have, and where that difference of opinion really begins and ends.
Well, I think Biden is always looking for diversity of opinions and diversity of views. He always wants to hear that. But I think that it is reflective of the broader Democratic Party, but it is a minority opinion within the Democratic Party. And I think that she's reflective of a minority view within the Democratic Party. And I don't think that it's something that Israel should dwell upon or worry about tremendously. However, I think Israel should be mindful of it, depending upon its actions, how much support that kind of a view could garner within the Democratic Party, and even in other corners within from independents and from other corners within the American populace.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That is all the time that we have today. Thank you again, Heather Stone and Ambassador Danny Ayalon, for joining us. And remember that all of you watching at home, you and your neighbors are all valuable no matter who you voted for. And finally, tune in next time on Insider for more in-depth analysis on everything Israel. If there's a topic that you want us to cover next, please let us know in the comment sections online. And for more news from ILTV, follow ILTV on Facebook, like us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel or our new newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.